Almost there. And I think we are probably now live on our virtual forum, our ABC forum. This might be a record. It's only 2 minutes past the advertised starting time, so I think we're doing pretty well tonight. Let's hope technology gets us through. I want to acknowledge that while there are people here from all over New South Wales and I think the ACT, that I'm on Darug land, and I'd like to pay respects to elders past and present, but also acknowledge the Gundungurra who are part of the electorate, whose lands are part of the electorate I represent. And I think Michelle Rowland, our Shadow Minister for Communications, is probably on Darug land as well. But I'd like to acknowledge all the First Peoples whose land many of you are sitting on as we broadcast this around Sydney and I think New South Wales and the ACT. And there may even be people from other places. So in fact, feel free in the comments on Facebook, let us know where you're listening to this from. It'd be great to have a picture of where you are, whether you're Blue Mountains and Hawkesbury in the Macquarie electorate, whether you're from Western Sydney, whether you're from the ACT or further afield, we'd love to know. And thank you all for being here. This is, I think, the 6th in our series of virtual forums where we get to spend a really good hour talking to a shadow minister about not every issue in their shadow portfolio, but one issue with some depth. And I know I could run one of these with Michelle Rowland on the NBN, and that would probably last days because she has been a fierce advocate and supported me in trying to get better NBN for this region. But tonight it's about the ABC. Michelle started in Parliament in 2010, but became Shadow Communications Minister in 2016, so has an absolutely depth of expertise and understanding and a real passion for this. So thank you, Michelle, for joining us tonight on what we call a sort of our version of Q&A, really.
Thanks very much, Susan, and happy birthday, Susan. What a committed MP you are, not only a fierce advocate for the ABC, but also more generally for your community in terms of accessibility and recognising the importance of ICT, really to grow regions such as the mountains and the Hawkesbury. So I'm really delighted to be able to do this. Susan, I'm gathering you and I know each other well, so we'd like to keep this quite informal and more than anything, listen to the views of your constituents. And Q&A, in keeping with that theme, comments are also very welcome, yes. rather than questions, all of which I will attempt to answer as well as I can. What I thought...
Can I just jump in? One of the things people will know is that Michelle has visited this area many times. The most recent visit was post-fire to look at the mobile communications issues that we face. She's been up to Blackheath to talk NBN, she's talked ABC. So for those of you within Macquarie, you know, we can do some, you know, really local and specific questions around it. And of course, the ABC Friends in the Blue Mountains is one of the most active groups of the ABC Friends franchise, as it were. But yeah, we'll keep it really informal. And just for people who haven't done one of these before, how do you get your question asked to Michelle? Well, I ask it, you write it in the comments, and my team are monitoring the comments on Facebook. They're going to flick those messages through to me. We have managed to get through lots of questions in previous ones that people have asked. What we're going to do, Michelle's going to give us a bit of an overview of where things sit right now, so that we've all got a common starting point on that. I'll then probably have a bit of discussion, but we'll be starting then to feed through your questions. So feel free to pop them in the comments and we will try to get to as many of them as we can. Sure. But Michelle, I'll give you the floor. Let's just paint a picture for people of where things are at.
Sure. Well, I think there's probably three key issues here, Susan, and We did an ABC forum a little while ago in the last term in Blackheath. But in that, I think we very clearly laid out the case for why another term of Liberal national cuts in particular for the ABC were going to be a bad thing. I guess my thesis that I've got here for you tonight is that unfortunately everything we sort of predicted is coming to bear. There is that issue of funding being cut, jobs being lost. In this term, really all that has been done in just over a year is that funding being cut, the jobs cuts being felt, and some tinkering with the ABC's charter. In the meantime, we've got a crisis in regional media. We've got the government and a number of stakeholders pushing the ABC to be characterised essentially as a broadcaster of market failure. So where market failure has been addressed in the past, in particular for Australian content and children's content, that is being sought to be pushed by, in some quarters, onto the ABC. We've got issues about misinformation and disinformation, particularly at this very difficult period that the world is going through. The ABC being such a trusted source of news with the pandemic, but also exactly as you say, a trusted source during natural disasters such as the bushfires. So where I think that lands us, we could, Labor could very easily be accused of really running the same lines that we have before, but the reality is it does come down to funding, it does come down to support, but more than that, I think we should all be aware of is the short-sightedness of this government after 7 years to fail to leverage off a great national asset is having consequences. So look, I've prepared a couple of slides. I'll go to the first one, and really I'm not going to dwell on these, and don't worry, I'm not going to have death by PowerPoint. I think this just helps to set the scene a bit. So
absolutely, you'll be pleased to know we've already got questions starting to come in. So there
we go.
A very keen audience.
Sure. Well, look, I'll flick through these quickly because I think that, while these do set the stage, I don't need to dwell on them. We all know where it started, nearly 7 years ago now, the promise of no cuts to the ABC or SBS, that barely lasted out the year. Next slide. We now have the Prime Minister and the Minister for Communications essentially gaslighting the nation, saying there's actually no cuts. The Managing Director has made it very clear, as did the previous Managing Director, that these are cuts. And this latest round of cuts, $84 million that are coming to bear, which Scott Morrison inflicted himself as Treasurer some years ago, that is having an impact on jobs. We've seen jobs go only in the last couple of weeks. The next slide. Again, here we are, fact check on the Minister for Communications essentially saying the ABC is receiving more and more funding. In real terms, we know that's not the case, and the Minister has really been shown up here.
Yeah.
The reality is that the ABC is underfunded. And as I'll show you on the next slide, this isn't coming from me, this is coming from the ACCC and their digital platforms inquiry. The ACCC very clearly recommended what they called stable and adequate funding for the public broadcasters, so the SBS as well as the ABC. But most importantly in this frame, Susan, you as a former member of the Fourth Estate, I talked about the crisis in regional media and in particular in local reporting. We've seen hundreds of newsrooms and titles closed down. But we haven't got a framework from this government for how to address it. And the ACCC made it very clear that the public broadcasters are not resourced to fully compensate for that decline in local reporting. So even if you accepted that our public broadcasters should be there to resolve market failure, they're not even being equipped to resolve that market failure.
No, and I'm sure we're going to get some, I've already got a question to delve into that a bit more deeply in terms of the role of the ABC, so that's that'll be great to talk about.
Sure. It's also coming from BAI Communications, which is the entity that owns the majority of the transmission towers. And they made it very clear, and this is the Royal Commission, the Bushfires Royal Commission, a substantial number of smaller transmission sites are not capable of withstanding natural disasters. We know that when the mobile towers went down, when the fixed lines went out, it was radio, and it was commercial radio as well that served an important role during the bushfires in many parts of Australia, as well as community radio. But it makes it very clear from the owners of these towers themselves that more funding is needed to actually provide that resilience in future. Resilience seems to be a big buzzword, but actually backing it up to becoming self-fulfilling is something that this government is yet to do. Yeah. And you'll see those recommendations there. The Lowy Institute, the funding envelope for the ABC, when we look at international broadcasting, is actually a quarter of the size it was a decade ago. And look at where we sit on the global comparisons. And it's a shame to say, we like to talk a lot about soft power, the influence of China, for example, and we could have a full-on debate about where that's happening. There's been inquiries by the Department of Foreign Affairs and also in the communications context. But the reality is this: if you leave a vacuum, as has happened in shortwave, the Australian network, the ABC's ability to have a role in the Pacific, that vacuum gets filled. And it is really not in Australia's long-term interests to have left such a vacuum in the Pacific for many reasons, least of all it being filled by, in a soft power context that is not necessarily aligned with Australia's interests.
I am surprised to see the top two on that slide. I had expected the UK and France and Deutsche Welle and Germany to be there, but I hadn't expected the others to be 1 and 2. So that's interesting.
Very telling, yes. And then we go to, I think it's important to cover off, and I think this is very relevant, the national platform. We recognise the important role that the ABC has played with bushfires, the pandemic. The other one there, the School on Me, if any of your colleagues who've joined us, Susan, like me, had school-aged children being homeschooled, it was a very difficult time. And the role of the ABC, I mean, this was in a very minor way, leveraging off a national asset, but certainly it showed what the ABC is capable of doing, and it should be capable of doing much more, particularly since it's got a trusted platform like iView as well. And again, just to touch on in the next slide, I think it is very refreshing that the ABC is doing a focus on mental health, on the environment, on encouraging new and upcoming music talent. And in particular, again, that aspect of mental health, having a platform that is national, is free, ubiquitous and stable, we should be much better as a country at leveraging off what we've got here to get some of those messages out. And I'm sure, again, some of our friends who've joined us would know that it was through the ABC, and not necessarily through all Australian shows, but certainly those messages getting out about to children in language they could understand, about the importance of washing your hands, the importance of social distancing. That was but one example. And the ABC did that off their own bat, not at any direction, but certainly in accordance with their charter. I'm just about to wrap up. And again, Bluey, highest rating children's program going around these days for very good reason.
Yeah, a great success and popular with grown-ups too.
Absolutely. And the ABC has added audio description to Bluey as well, which is fantastic. Again, goes to that whole issue of accessibility. Haywire, which is very relevant for your electorate, Susan, encouraging regional and remote young Australians to have their say, become producers. And anyone I've seen you at that Haywire event, it is absolutely uplifting. Don't Stop the Music. Again, if you haven't tune into that, check it out. I think we're just about done, other than to say we committed some weeks ago that we would reverse this $84 million of cuts, and that remains our policy. We don't know when the next election will be, obviously. It may even be held as early as the third quarter of next year. But we will have, I can assure everyone, we will have a fully developed policy by that time. I think the fact that the national platform will, certainly it's going through an iterative process at the moment, but I can reassure you that that commitment to the ABC as a properly funded public broadcaster and a policy backing that up to reverse those cuts will be part of that as well.
Fantastic. And there's a comment come through from Robin Cook who says the audio description's a fantastic initiative. And, you know, we thought it was a bit overdue. And many of us have been advocating for it. It is fantastic to see it. Look, I might cover off, there are a few questions around and thoughts around bushfires. I'm going to want to come to some more of that accessibility and disability side that the ABC has such a vital role in. One aspect of it is obviously in bushfires that people rely really heavily on if they have a hearing disability, they rely on being able to see with captions on TV what the information is. And if they can't have if they're blind or have some sort of sight impairment, they rely really heavily on the radio. So that, and in bushfires, all those things are just so exacerbated. One of Marilyn pointed out that she lives in, well, all of us in the Mountains and Hawkes, we live in a severe bushfire area. And her one support was an emergency battery radio, a transistor radio with a battery. Now, we did the same. We lost power on one of the very bad fire days when it may well have ended up at our back door. And for about 2 hours, we had no mobile, we had no access to the internet. All we had was the transistor radio to tell us, and, you know, all the shutters down, everything, you know, kind of in lockdown. Now, you and I know this, but the bushfire coverage really stretched the ABC. They used a lot of their budget, and I don't know whether it's close to 100% of their emergency budget has already been used, and it's only halfway through the year. That surely is an area where we would have expected to see the government really step up and resource the ABC for these unprecedented times. So, you know, that is one of the huge disappointments we've had so far this year, isn't it?
It certainly is. And it is very clear that lives were saved because people had access to ABC broadcasting through primarily transistor radios when everything came down. It's interesting, Susan, that you said, you know, the ABC's emergency broadcasting budget. This isn't very well known, but they actually don't have a separate line item for emergency broadcasting. They just do it. So, and it often means getting people in the field, getting people to operate from their own homes, in some cases, bringing in extra people. But the managing director, to his credit, has said they will never cut costs in order to skimp on that service. They will find the money to be able to do it. And the ABC confirmed that the number of emergency broadcasting events that they had covered was actually double to triple the last couple of years. That's in early 2020. So with everything that happened with bushfires, floods, etc., and the costs of emergency broadcasting are going up. It remains one of those things where some aspects of production get less expensive, but emergency broadcasting requires you to be on the ground, to have the trucks, to have the capabilities in order to deliver that. So they don't have a separate line item. I'm as surprised as you that of all things that could be announced, and maybe this will be one of the recommendations of the Bushfire Royal Commission. We've also got a Senate inquiry going on at the moment. But for all the talk, the buzzword, as I said earlier, it became resilience. We've got to make our telco networks more resilient. We've got to build in more resilience. That actually costs money. If the government can't see that not only would this have bipartisan support, but it goes into, here I'm being uber political, but it goes into their grid of keeping Australians safe, which is supposed to be part of their safe territory, and quite frankly should be the first job of government in any case, irrespective of their political persuasion. So I just make those points.
And look, Hayley Stone's made a comment that she's just done a report on the bushfires and the impact on people with disabilities. And she has found that and has the evidence that the ABC was a vital resource for those groups to get information. So I think there's no question that the ABC, I mean, it's there. I didn't ever work at the ABC because I worked in commercial radio, but I reckon if I'd stayed in radio another decade, I probably would have ended up at the ABC. And I'm certainly married to a long-time ABC reporter. It's important to me culturally, from an information perspective, having trusted information, and we know how highly trusted it is. But for people with disability, it again becomes a lifesaver. And that's, Robert has put this point. He says he's blind, he uses adaptive technology, braille, computer, iPhone and internet, and he also uses radio for the print handicap station, 1RPH. But even so, access to printed and published information is limited, and therefore ABC radio and television, especially radio, is vitally important as a means of information access for someone like him. So that reinforces all the things we've been saying about the role that it plays in our society.
Absolutely. And, it was pleasing to see that, the government recently decided to give, it's not a large amount, I'm not sure how far it will go, to the public broadcasters for audio description, for example. But my view, and we've made this case as a matter of policy, audio description should, and the ability for anyone to be able to access communications. It's essentially a human right to which we signed up. Yes, it does cost money to do, but the technology involved in that is now, even as you described, it's actually quite diverse, and a lot of this has been developed over time, and it should be a requirement to provide audio description.
Yeah. So a couple more bushfire comments. Marion says the ABC was magnificent during the bushfires. Many of us would not have survived without them. But Gay points out bushfires and COVID-19, the ABC has been the lifeline, with Norman Swan setting the benchmark for informed, reliable and factual guidance and advice. And actually I was talking to an ophthalmologist yesterday about COVID, about hygiene measures and surface sanitising, and he said that doctor from the ABC, and I said, oh, you mean Norman Swan? He said he's spot on. He's absolutely spot on. So we are really blessed that the information that comes from the ABC is accessible in its, even I get the science show and I'm not particularly inclined that way. It's in language we can understand and convey and share, but it's also trustworthy. Now, one of the questions that's come through is though about this perceived bias that there is. What do you say to people, when you hear them say, oh, the ABC, it's only has one point of view?
There's two things I say. Firstly, I recognise that the ABC makes no one of any political persuasion happy 100% of the time. So they must be doing something right there. And, it is their job, it's in their charter that they are to be of broad appeal, that they are to have that accessibility context, but really it is for all Australians. And, that's not something that is said in a trite way at all. It is supposed to be of broad appeal to every single Australian of any background, of any cohort. So that's the first thing. It doesn't make everyone happy. Everyone's got a complaint. I often will there'll be an episode of something or a report on something or other. And invariably, if it's contentious, I will get one of our colleagues, Susan, on the phone to me saying, what are you going to do about this? And I said, oh, if you're upset about it, that's probably a good thing. Probably shows that they are doing their job. But the second point to make is the ABC is a public broadcaster, not a state broadcaster. So, even with Labor in government, it would be wrong to assume that it would be presenting a bias that would actually favour the government of the day. So I don't want a state broadcaster. I want a public broadcaster that is going to challenge, and that is the reason why their trust ratings are off the charts. You don't get a public broadcaster with such trustworthy brand and ratings unless they are doing something right that goes to bias. And also, quite frankly, Susan, I will say to people, who say, oh, we need some long-term study into ABC bias. I reckon people might be a bit surprised one way or another by what that shows. And I really doubt that it will show a bias one way or the other to such a degree that it demonstrates that the broadcaster is not independent.
Yeah, look, when I think about that, when people are saying those things, it's often about the current affairs and news type programs, but often it's about the those where opinions are shared as opposed to news, where the reporting still tends to be reasonably straight down the line. And, as a journo, I say to people, as an ex-journo, I say, well, it's whoever is in government, that's who the media is holding to account in an ideal situation. Every journalist is certainly trained to think that way, that it's not about what your political view is, but it's whatever the prevailing view is from a government. That's the one you have to challenge, because that's your job. So
yeah, you're absolutely right. And, I've actually found whilst, I'm not in government and I'm not being held to account, I have had some of my toughest interviews given by the ABC, even on issues of ABC funding and independence, because I will be challenged on that. And I think sometimes there seems to be, maybe even a compensatory bias. But the notion that the ABC goes easier on Labor MPs is absolute nonsense, utter nonsense.
Yeah. Look, I know as a young journo, if I thought I'd given someone a reasonably easy interview, one day, the next day I'd want to go really hard on them just to show that there wasn't any favoritism happening there. So this really leads to a question that Sue is asking, which is goes to the next level about the role of the ABC within a democracy. She says, how do we convince those who argue that the ABC is biased, that they have, even if they think there is a bias, that they have an investment in information to underpin democracy by adequately funding the ABC. So, if you can't convince somebody that there isn't bias there, even still saying them, but this is the role it plays in our democracy. How key do you think it is to the strength of Australia's democracy?
I think it's fundamental, Susan. It's fundamental to the influence that Australia has, the positive democratic influence in our region. I was discussing earlier about leaving a vacuum. Even if you thought that the ABC was serving no purpose, should be privatised, name your price. I think there is no doubt that the fact that it has so much skill, it's got a large number of resources, it's got infrastructure, it is a ready-made platform for leveraging Australia's interests in our region. So even if you're one of these people that said you should just be there for market failure, serving regional and remote areas and doing things that are not profitable, that the commercial networks don't want to do, even if you thought that, the reality remains that the ABC is capable of being leveraged in our region as part of both soft power, but also as part of our democratic influence in our region, which is why the loss of the Australia network, I think, is only just now starting to be felt. I had that slide up, Susan, about, China was at the top of, those countries that invest in overseas, areas of influence in their media. I hadn't fully appreciated, but was enlightened by some experts on this. Like Chinese state media has the resources and has the capability to, for example, go to some of our neighbours in the Pacific, whom, quite frankly, we have neglected on many levels and not had a serious economic partnership with for many decades now. But they are going into those areas, sponsoring people to learn journalism, ensuring that they've got capabilities. Why isn't Australia providing those capabilities? Once upon a time, we used to, through the presence of the ABC on shortwave and the Australian network. Nature abhors a vacuum, and that vacuum has been filled.
Yeah, and look, people like Jemima Garrett have spent a lot of time doing those sorts of things and are still fighting for there to be a really strong Australian presence. We will pay the price for that failure. And you're right, when there's a vacuum, there's always someone very eager to fill it, and not to the standards that we would necessarily, subscribe to.
Precisely, not in our interests.
And this is, look, Peggy, I think you may well have seen a letter from Peggy on the issue that she's raising here. And that's around she says it came from the Saturday paper. There was a report about the commissioning of yet another investigation of the business models of the Australian news and media organisations. And the terms of the report seem to include specifically the impact of public broadcasters on commercial players. Now, this is something that gets trotted out at different times. The public broadcaster is having an unfair impact on the revenue stream of the commercial broadcasters in some way. So, and there's variations that I've seen in 30 or so years that it's come out. But her question is, what do we think about why this inquiry is being undertaken now? And she feels it's being done with some haste. Where do you see it all fits in?
I think Peggy's comments are very astute for a couple of reasons. The first is that after 7 years and the crisis that has been slowly gathering in regional media in particular and public interest journalism overall, finally, the government is starting to do some of the job that it should have done some time ago and examined, the state of play. In fact, we called for this in 2016, and whilst the ACCC Digital Platforms inquiry was undertaken, a look at the different models, the impact that the drop, in particular, the drop in advertising revenue is having on commercial mastheads. The increasing news is very expensive. Local news, people want it, but it's incredibly expensive to produce. So you can appreciate why, in this environment where no new models have been done, the only thing this government's done in media essentially is to change some of the ownership rules, make our markets more concentrated. And Malcolm Turnbull said this will ensure that we've got a viable commercial media sector, for the next 10 years or for decades to come. Look, it barely lasted 3 years, and we've had so many mastheads closing. So, in one sense, Susan, I guess Peggy's right in that finally the government is doing some of that job. It is too little, too late. My understanding is, and I just had my office check, they haven't even announced on their grants website who is going to be undertaking this work. So it does seem to be getting done in some haste. But it is curious that the government can find, only in the last week or so, $10 million ostensibly to support underrepresented women's sports for Fox Sports. That's in addition to, I think it was 40 million or however was previously given during the media ownership debate. So that takes the tally to several tens of millions. But with and we've asked this in Senate estimates, Susan, with no measurable impact on coverage of women's sport. So it's extremely curious that, this argument about competitive neutrality, which some sectors of the commercial media complain about. There doesn't seem to be complaints when money goes out the door to commercial enterprises without a commensurate output capable of being measured. But no, Peggy's comments are, it is really curious that they're choosing to do this now. They had the efficiency reviews, they had, that much in terms of, that many studies in terms of, how we can undermine the ABC even more. And in the face of all that, we've got the ABC saving lives, we've got the ABC performing roles that it's not even budgeted to do.
Yeah. Now, there's a couple of very specific questions that I don't know if you'll have answers to, but
sure.
I had a call today. My office had a call from Bill from Laura. Bill's 91, and he rang to say he didn't know our forum was on. But he rang to say he was really frustrated that he couldn't speak to a person at ABC Classic Radio anymore, that it's all automated when you phone. He just wanted to be able to ring someone, give some feedback or make a request. And it's little things like that I guess, making people feel that we're getting a second best. We're certainly not getting what we used to get with, humans there the whole time. I don't know if you want to comment on Classic FM. I am, having been, studied classical violin, but don't ask me to play the violin anymore. In my youth, I've always been a big follower of Classic FM on some of those long drives that I do. It is different. Still some wonderful presenters, but it has changed, hasn't it, with the cuts to the ABC?
It certainly has. And, the ABC has always been a very innovative outfit. They were one of the earliest adopters of things like podcasts, which are now the norm. But my office has taken a number of really specific complaints. And they're not done in a malicious way at all. It's just that there is no other station. There is no other set of programming like ABC Classic FM, and it must be very frustrating for constituents like Bill, was it? Like Bill, and what we can do, we try as much as we can, Susan, to take these up directly with the ABC corporate person whom we deal with. And Sophie from my office is listening in, and I'll ask her specifically to take that bit of feedback for Bill, and we'll see what we can do for you.
Yeah, and I'll send through a bit more detail on the comment that he made. Now, here's another one you may or may not have an answer to. Michael wants to know, why is Paul Barry paid $200,000 a year to produce a 15-minute show? Now, I'm sure lots of people know that we're talking about Media Watch, and I have to say, as a journalist, this was a must-watch program for every journalist that I've ever known, and you were always terrified that you'd done something that would end up on Media Watch. So I think it's a really important, police on the beat type program. But how do you react to those sorts of concerns that these are large amounts of money for what appears to be, a 15-minute output?
Well, look, I take the point, and I don't know the answer to. I don't even know if he is paid that much. I haven't specifically checked that in the ABC's annual reports, but I do know that they have those bands, the ranges of which talent gets paid what. And I guess part of it is, like, one of the questions you might want to ask is, if he did that somewhere else, would he get paid the same amount? I don't know. They could, the issue of having monitoring of misinformation and disinformation is being done by a couple of units now. The fact check unit is at RMIT. I don't know what the relationship is of Paul Barry there, but the fact that the ABC sees fit to put him on, firstly, I respect the ABC's independence in deciding that that's what his value is, but I also don't know what else he does. Like maybe the output is that 15-minute show, but maybe there is other stuff that he does that we don't see.
Yeah, and I do think that we've always been very clear about the independence of the ABC. When people say, oh, I didn't like that program, or I don't think that person should be there, it hasn't been an interventionist approach by any Labor governments around it. And I think that's one of the great gifts of the ABC, that they do their own stuff. So you'll like some of it, you won't like some of it. They have to be accountable for their own decisions, don't they, financially?
Exactly. And, it's for the managing director, I think I actually think that he's performing his job. If you have to ask me, do I think he's doing a good job? I think he is. I think he was the right choice for managing director after the tumultuous time that they went through a couple of years ago. He's someone that came from the ABC some time ago. He has a genuine passion for the role. And I'm sure that he's acutely aware that these are the sorts of issues that, not only detractors, but people who genuinely want to know. And considering it's taxpayer funded, fair enough. They should be able to answer that question.
Yeah. Now, there's two questions to do with funding. One is from Fran and relates to the efficiency dividend. And do we know what proportion of the 84 million is the efficiency dividend, and what proportion is a cut to the forward estimates bottom line? So that's one question. And then Amanda says, look, you're preaching to the converted. What about the actual strategies to reverse the funding cuts? So I'll throw both of those at you.
Sure. The first one, the MD actually covered this off. He was asked this question, but really didn't provide an answer for it at the press club, sort of talked around it a bit. In reality, he would say that they are always squeezed. They are always finding efficiencies simply because they've been cut by so many hundreds of millions in the last 7 years. But that question was actually asked of him, and I must say I don't think an answer was given. I don't know the reason for that. Maybe he doesn't know. Maybe this is the kind of information that doesn't become apparent until some years in advance. No, I don't know the answer to that, but that certainly is something that we continue to pursue at every Senate estimates, and we'll do so again later this year, assuming estimates goes ahead, which I'm pretty sure it will in some form. The second one about preaching to the converted. It's an unfortunate reality that the way in which we actually get changes made, the way in which we start having a government that supports the ABC properly, and keeps to its word when it comes to leveraging of this, is by getting elected. I'm sorry that is the short answer. I'm sorry that didn't happen last year. But the reality is that there are consequences of electing Conservative governments who have done what they have done over the past 7 years. And I remember you were there, Susan, where I said, if we don't win this election last year, if we don't win this election, then the following things will happen, and they are all coming to fruition, all of them.
Yeah, and that's such a depressing thought. Susie has commented that she thinks one of the consequences of the cuts are that the ABC is relying on more reruns. And she's actually said, does the government receive kickbacks from pay TV channels? Now, I'm pretty sure that's not. She's trying to understand why she's having to watch lots of reruns. And my thinking is they're just, the money is not there to fund the new productions that the ABC has traditionally funded, because they are really expensive. The inquiry I did into the film and television industry a couple of years ago just shows how expensive it is to create a new drama and to keep producing episodes. So that is one of the consequences we're seeing, isn't it? A decline in the volume.
That's right. And, the ABC's drama budget has taken a hit as well. We've been talking about emergency broadcasting. The MD made it clear that if it came to a point where they needed to ditch some of their drama production in order to provide emergency broadcasting, he'd do it in a heartbeat. You're essentially right there, Susan. Yeah, it is the costs.
Consequences, yeah. Now, here's a question to do with, and it picks up a bit on what Amanda was saying about, how do we actually get change? And Ross says, in light of former Prime Minister John Howard's comment that the ABC are, quote, our enemies talking to our friends, would ABC Friends and the ABC alumni have a greater impact if they appealed directly to more conservative organisations and groups like the CWA or the NFF, emphasising the risks these cuts pose to ABC rural staff and programs? Now, what's interesting about that question is I have been stunned in Parliament to see how little the Nationals, who are meant to be representing the bush and regional areas, how little they fight for the ABC. So yeah, what is, like, if we want to encourage people to be really active and to target the people, by all means write to me, but I'm already on site. What are some of the things you'd like to see?
No, I think that's a really good point about, and it's just like the Labor Party's appeal. Like, we can either decide we are going to appeal to a narrow base, talk amongst ourselves, the converted. It doesn't get you into government. And I think there's a need for a bit of self-reflection here. We're talking about, exactly as you say, Nationals who don't fight for the ABC. But again, we have to ask ourselves, winning seats is about winning votes, is about changing votes. So I don't have that sort of empirical research, and maybe it's something that ABC Friends could, just as a suggestion, could do. Like, where are we likely to change votes with the issue of the ABC? Quite frankly, I don't think we've tried. When I say we, I mean those of us who support the ABC. I don't think we've tried hard enough in some of those communities that we assume are dyed-in-the-wool gnats. Yes, I think you're absolutely right. We do need to branch out to the CWAs. We do need to branch out to everyone from the Farmers Federation, to those big industries in rural and regional areas, whom we just assume aren't going to vote for us and aren't on site. Maybe they do value the ABC. Maybe we can present an argument that you have a choice at the next election. Like, you really have a choice about leveraging off a national asset or more of the same. That's your choice there. But I am harking back to one of the earlier questions in terms of, well, what's the strategy? I'll be very honest with you. It was quite disheartening to see that at the last election, we were all very clear about what the consequences would be. And I honestly can't tell you, Susan, how many votes we did change at the last election. We promised to restore funding. We promised to do certain things with the ABC. I honestly don't know how many votes that won us. And again, it could be a matter that we do need to branch out to some of those people who might be soft for the taking, and it needs to be in seats that make a difference. Because don't get me wrong, I fully appreciate that. Everyone here has probably joined the call. Maybe some people haven't. Maybe some people are curious to see what it is. But I hazard a guess that most people who have bothered to join tonight value the ABC. It's the people who don't value it, or the people who might question, what's in it for me, what's in it for my country, whom we need to appeal to, which is why I'm always very keen, even after this call, Susan, to receive ideas on how we should be doing that.
Yeah, great. Well, we do. I know we've got at least one person who said they're from Paul Fletcher's electorate. So any ideas on there's, and that's the North Shore of Sydney, obviously. So I know there are lots of ABC listeners there, but you're right, it doesn't necessarily change votes. Now, I'm conscious of time, and there's a couple of a question that's come through that is sort of tangential, but still goes to really the democratic process, from Julian about, have you heard, Michelle, any updates about what's happening with the government's plans to pass legislation to make Facebook and Google pay Australian publishers for news content? And do you expect the ABC or SBS to get a slice of that revenue?
So this is being worked out, not so much in a legislative context yet. The ACCC is due, we thought it was this week, so it might actually be tomorrow, that the draft code comes out. So that process has been driven by the ACCC. So yeah, I think they have been doing their job there. They've been consulting widely. And it was good that the ACCC stepped in and said, we're not going to wait to see if your negotiations break down. It's pretty clear negotiations are going nowhere. The ABC and probably the SBS, I can't say for sure, but I know there have been reports that the ABC, maybe this was in their submission, said that they should also be entitled to receive some of the revenues from that. And again, you know, some of the commercial networks stakeholders have criticised that. But look, I don't think this is a case of, you know, fighting over a pie. Like the issue is if the platforms are utilising content and making money out of it, the whole point of the code is that the publishers get recompensed for that. So if the ABC content is being used, then really you can't see a valid reason for them not to be part of that. But that is actually, we expected that to come out this week. So maybe stay tuned. It might actually be released tomorrow or in the next couple of days.
Maybe a Friday afternoon special.
Could be.
There's, and this almost goes to Christian's question, which is there any way that individuals can provide extra funding to the ABC, given it's already funded out of taxes? You know, if you knew every time you clicked on an ABC story on Facebook or Google that a little bit was going there, you know, give you a good feeling, that's for sure.
I think it would actually end up making, it's really hard to quantify at the moment, but, you know, and part of the issue has been for the commercial networks, at least, that, you know, just that drain in advertising revenue away from them and onto the platforms, not transparent terms of trade, you know, that will make a significant difference to them. But you would expect there to be at least some positive impact for the ABC as well, whether it compensates for, you know, the hundreds of millions that have been cut. I don't think it's going to be the case, unfortunately, but I think every bit will help.
Yeah. Look, we've only got a couple more minutes. One issue that just hasn't come up in questioning, but I think is really important for us as the Labor Party to be thinking about, is the ABC's role in telling Australian stories and getting Australian musicians exposed. You know, it's been so weird in COVID times in terms of, you know, no live music, no live concerts, all those sorts of things. But, you know, for you as the Shadow Minister, where do you put that cultural piece into your policy thinking?
No, it's a really interesting question because, you know, culture is what you want it to be, but I see it more than anything. I don't so much think about it as culture. I think about it as Australian identity and the way in which it's expressed, whether it be through music, through drama, through how reporting is done, you know, telling stories that have background in across the whole, you know, Australian spectrum. So I see it more, Susan, myself, in terms of, Australian identity. And how that's expressed is really up to the broadcaster to decide, but they would know that there's a demand there in terms of music and other arts as well. Yeah,
well, I mean, for me, the loss on ABC Radio National of some of the music shows just really seriously reduces the capacity for Australian musicians to be heard and to start to be heard. You know, obviously Triple J has a crucial role for a certain genre, but even Radio National. So there's all those sorts of things are only going to happen if there's funding. So, you know, let's just reinforce for people right now, possibly years out from an election, possibly a year out from an election, if Labor's in government, our policy as of this time is to restore that recent funding cut. What final message do you want people to have, Michelle? And I guess to get them to see how deep our conviction is, because when I hear MPs talking in Parliament about the ABC, Labor MPs are the strongest voices I have ever heard in supporting it. I don't hear much from the other side. Hear deathly silence from the Nats, who I thought might be okay on that issue. You know, so let's make sure people walk away knowing just what the depth of our feeling is.
Sure. And I mean, it really is a touchstone for us, supporting a public broadcaster that is so trusted, that does its job so well, that saves lives. All of those are very apparent. But I guess the takeaway I want from this, Susan, is that going into the next election, we are going to have to pitch something different to the Australian community. Again, these things are well understood, but you would still get people hearing them and saying, yeah, okay, you should do, that's your job you should do, and you shouldn't be doing all these other things because, you know, you can get classical music, you can go and buy, you know, download all the classical music you want. You can do all these things, and we should have the ABC left as some sort of market failure broadcaster. There's no need for more funding for it because times are tough. You know, we need to be able to respond to that intelligently. And I do think that this is a time for us to be rethinking that. All those arguments, you know, inherently valid, Susan. There's nothing, no way you can argue against any of those arguments about how important the ABC is. But I think we need to broaden our appeal going into the next election on some of those issues I discussed about leveraging off a great asset, doing more with it, imagining how we can actually reach more people to assist them with things like mental health, for example, with things like, you know, goodness knows what the next stage of this pandemic looks like. But imagine if we had a public broadcaster in whom a government said, we need a message to be delivered. We need a trusted source in an age of disinformation. Where is we'll get the public broadcaster to do their job. We need to have stronger democracies in our region. We need to ensure that we fight for Australian interests. Why don't we use our public broadcaster to do that? So I'm sort of trying to give you a flavour, Susan, that I think we need to start having some different conversations with people who are not the converted yet. And that is going to challenge all of us who support the ABC to do things differently, to really start thinking about that, you know, perhaps 70% of people who don't think like us. So, you know, I know that you're very up for challenging yourself. I certainly am. You know, the election's not going to be tomorrow. So we do have some time to do this, to get an evidence-based base and to really start explaining to people that it will be, it is worthwhile voting Labor for all these reasons when it comes to the ABC.
So there's the invitation. Send me your ideas on how we expand the passion for the ABC so that others share the view that we have, that it is an absolute pillar of our society and our democracy. So feel free to email me those, susan.templeman.mp@aph.gov.au. Michelle, thank you very much. Now, for those who like to not just stick to the ABC, but also head into the commercial and the pay TV world, look out for Michelle on Sky TV tonight. A very different sort of interview experience coming up, I think a bit after 8 o'clock, and I think with Alan Jones. Is that right?
That is right, Susan.
There you go. Well, we'll say no more and leave it there. But thanks, Michelle, for giving up some time. And thank you for those of you who were with us at the beginning of the hour and have stuck through till the end. This will be on Facebook, so you can share it with people, encourage them to have a look, and please send any ideas that you think might help make sure that we can secure the ABC's future as the premium public broadcaster in the world. Thanks.